Chapter 583. The vehicle passed through Snow Country's declaration of war and the notice of the Wang family of Beihai had spread to every corner of Eastern Europe. Although they maintained restraint, the incomparably bloody war instantly entered a white-hot state. Eastern Europe had become hell overnight. Bullets were shuttling, shells were exploding, and fighter planes were flying. Countless blood and deaths appeared in every country and every city in Eastern Europe. Great chaos continued to spread, and order collapsed in an instant. The war swept everything. Even in the wilderness, the faint sound of fighting and explosions still echoed. The low-flying fighter planes swept across the sky, and the roar of artillery shells came from afar. The wind and rain stopped, and the air on the wet road was unusually fresh. Qin Weibai sat straight in the back row of the vehicle, replied to an email, and said quietly, "Counselor Wei Lozan said that we are even." A few stars appeared in the high deep sky. The master of Samsara Palace looked at the stars in the sky and nodded casually. "Put him in the observation area." The master of Samsara Palace paused and continued, "A level." Qin Weibai nodded and entered a complicated URL on the laptop. The web page opened after buffering. An extremely sharp saber occupied the entire screen. This was a saber. It was simple, not gorgeous, not complicated. It had a straight line and a slight arc at the tip of the saber. It was simple and straightforward, but it radiated sharpness in all directions. The saber turned slowly. Qin Weibai temporarily wrote a program and then began to enter the password. There were 3 passwords, and then there were 3 verification. After the verification, an extremely delicate and cumbersome website appeared in front of Qin Weibai. There were a large number of options, and everything about a big force in the dark world was listed in an orderly manner. This was the database of Samsara Palace, and also the hub of all intelligence. Qin Weibai clicked into a window. The window opened, and there was a national flag. She clicked in the flag of Snow Country, then entered Wei Lozan's name, and transferred all the information about him to the observation area. Then she looked at the list in the observation area, and was lost in thought. The so-called observation area was a separate web page. The web page was blank at first, but now it was filled with densely packed names. Behind each name was the nationality of the other party, as well as their current and former identities. Qin Weibai transferred Wei Lozan's information. After thinking about it, she made a note in front of Wei Lozan's name, Core Counselor of Snow Country. Almost everyone understood what the identity of a core member of the Snow Empire meant. This identity was incomparably illustrious and noble. To be more specific, if this identity was placed in Jianghu State, it was basically equivalent to the leader of the 6 major groups in Jianghu State. The name Wei Lozan represented an important force in Snow Country. Qin Weibai looked at the web page and suddenly said, "The Samsara Palace will be gone. It shouldn't exist. The establishment of the Samsara Palace is my obsession. After this battle, whether I die or not, the obsession should disappear." The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Qin Weibai sighed softly and typed an A in front of Wei Lozan's remark. Then, she closed the web page. It was hard for her to describe these people in the observation area of the Samsara Palace's databank. But one thing was certain. Before these people entered the observation area, they could all be regarded as members of the Samsara Palace. The Samsara Palace's definition of its own people was complicated and simple. It had nothing to do with standpoint. Through countless transactions, coercion, inducement, and a series of means, the Samsara Palace had to be sure of only one thing. That was, according to the investment of the Samsara Palace, when the people of the Samsara Palace asked for help, the other party would not refuse. This was one of their own people. As for whether they would continue to cooperate or be even after the other party helped them, it didn't make much sense. The database of the Samsara Palace was extremely strict and meticulous. Everything was based on data. On this complex website, all the transactions and feelings could be listed in numbers. What kind of favors and what kind of things were done were all concluded with one life after another. As a real giant in the north of Snow Country, Wei Lozan helped the Samsara Palace clear the entire Mormons this time. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. He used a troupe of his own. Such a move was enough to repay all the investment of the Samsara Palace. So, he would enter the observation area. In the observation area, everything he did in the future had nothing to do with the Samsara Palace. They might start a new cooperation, or they might become hostile. The Samsara Palace didn't care about the so-called standpoint. What the Samsara Palace cared about was that the other party took action this time. Qin Weibai closed the notebook and sighed. All the preparations before the final battle had been completed, and all the trump cards had been completely revealed. The Samsara Palace had put all its strength into this general trend without hesitation. After this battle, no matter what the result was, the Samsara Palace was destined to cease to exist. She pinched the hard edge of the notebook with her tender white palm, looked at the master of Samsara Palace, and whispered, "Will you die? Do you want me to live, or do you want me to die?" The master of Samsara Palace glanced at Qin Weibai. Her eyes were empty, but there was a hint of playfulness and mockery in her tone. "I don't know." Qin Weibai's eyes were complicated and blank. After a while, she lowered her head and whispered to herself. The master of Samsara Palace reached out and held her hand. She said softly, "Then it's up to fate." The phone rang. Qin Weibai took out her mobile phone and looked at the number. She raised her eyebrows slightly and answered it. "Mr. Lin." Her tone was warm and soft. Lin Fengting was silent for a while on the other end of the phone, as if he wanted to explain something. Finally, he smiled helplessly. "I'm Qin Weibai." Qin Weibai's tone was calm and normal, as if it was a matter of course. Lin Fengting no longer hesitated and said calmly, "Arsis is dead. Tribulation killed him." Qin Weibai was speechless for a while. Although the master of Samsara Palace had expected it, the strange and shocked emotion was still so obvious when she heard the news. Tribulation. He killed Arsis. This dreamlike news even caused her to be unable to come back to her senses. "Angel is dead," Qin Weibai whispered. She didn't pay too much attention to Arsis, but Arisis's death proved Angel's fate from another perspective. She glanced at the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace, who had obviously heard the news, didn't say anything, but her figure became a little lonely. "We tried," Qin Weibai whispered, but she shook her head, and her voice became colder and colder. "How did Angel die?" "I'm still looking into the details." Lin Fengting said quietly, "Tribulation has now broken through the peak of the invincible realm, and he even stands at the same height as Wang Tianzong. His killing intent is very strong. At present, there is still hope for him to continue to break through. It's fake." Qin Weibai was silent for a while, feeling a little regretful. Lin Fengting also fell silent. After a long time, he said in a complicated tone, "Yes, it's all fake." Qin Weibai didn't know martial arts, but as an expert at the peak of the invincible realm, Lin Fengting could clearly understand this feeling. At this time, the murderous intent over Mormons was soaring. Tribulation's killing intent continued to condense. He broke through the peak of the invincible realm and kept rising. He was getting closer and closer to the real supreme realm. There was still one step left, half a step left, half a step left. There was still a little left. That killing intent continued to condense, and it was almost a sure breakthrough. But it was all fake. Tribulation's breakthrough was too violent. The invincible realm was not stable, and he was seriously injured on the trial day. When he came to Mormons, he had let go of everything and no longer suppressed his injuries, so that his real combat capability directly entered the peak of the invincible realm. After killing Arsis, he surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, but it further increased the burden on his body. From that moment on, all the foundation of his martial arts had begun to collapse. Tribulation's path was over, and it was impossible for him to continue to break through. Such a powerful and peerless martial arts could only be maintained for one night. Lin Fengting suddenly felt a little sad. Tribulation's aptitude was, "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." If everything went well, he should be able to enter the peak of the invincible realm, but it was impossible for him to break through again. Tonight, Angel's death completely stimulated him. With the blessing of the will of the transcendent realm before Angel's death, he went further and completely turned into darkness. In the darkness, he saw the supreme path, but he was also destined to sink in the darkness. Lin Fengting smiled and silently hung up the phone. Qin Weibai held the phone and was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "The Vatican is finished." The master of Samsara Palace nodded. Next, the Wang family of Beihai, the purgatory of heaven capital. Those who should withdraw from the stage of history should all withdraw. The car turned a corner along the mountain road. The starlight was lonely. Before Qin Weibai could speak, a strong light had suddenly hit them. Flaming fire slowed down the car, narrowed her eyes, and looked cold. A deep and majestic voice sounded in the strong light. "I am Virtuous Raymond. Marshal Virtuous Raymond Drisi, the Ice and Snow Corps has taken over this war zone. Qin Weibai, Flaming Fire, I order you to stop the car and allow you to surrender." The tall and valiant marshal stood at the forefront of the crowd, his eyes burning. Virtuous Raymond. He was one of the 8 marshals of Snow Country, one of the top 10 experts in Eastern Europe, and the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. His code name was Snow Eagle, and he was in charge of the Ice and Snow Corps. In the short time after Snow Country declared war, the army of Snow Country had directly rushed to the vicinity of Im, and it was a real elite army. The car slowed down slowly, but did not stop. Virtuous Raymond took a step forward. The violent lightning rose around him, and the air was extremely distorted. Where the lightning crisscrossed, a pseudo-domain had appeared around him. The whole dark world was still uncertain about the life and death of the master of Samsara Palace. But the Ice and Snow Corps had received the information. Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire, the second in command of the Samsara Palace, were in the car in front of them. The Samsara Palace was also one of the targets of the war declared by Snow Country. Capturing Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire was an absolute great achievement. Moreover, capturing the beautiful goddess Qin alive was undoubtedly an even greater hidden achievement. The car was getting closer and closer. Virtuous Raymond narrowed his eyes, and his aura became more and more dangerous. "I order you to stop." The car stopped. In the back row of the car, Qin Weibai turned on her mobile phone and sent a message to Li Tianlan. The master of Samsara Palace closed her eyes. "Hurry up," she said softly. Flaming Fire nodded. In Virtuous Raymond's sight, the door of the driver's seat of the car opened. Flaming Fire, the super master of the Samsara Palace with a cold but extremely beautiful face, came down. There was a flash of excitement in Virtuous Raymond's eyes. He didn't finish his words. In his sight, Flaming Fire raised her palm. The world began to rise higher and wider. Heaven and earth began to spin, and suddenly became chaotic. The coldness spread. Virtuous Raymond froze for a moment. In his sight, the army behind him had appeared below him, getting farther and farther away from him. He saw a headless corpse, dressed in a marshal's military uniform, still standing there. The huge darkness swallowed over. Was that his own corpse? The sharp and violent sword energy rolled up a storm at the moment when Flaming Fire raised her hand. Heaven and earth pressed down at the same time. It shattered in an instant. Flaming Fire's palm waved down without hesitation. 24 moves of sword shattering of land. The sword intent was like a torrent, crushing everything. Wherever the sword energy passed, there were blood waves rising into the sky. Flaming Fire continued to move forward. The domain began to appear after the sword energy. It was known as the strongest domain in the dark world and the unique technique of Kunlun City. 10th unique domain. The sword energy and the domain intertwined. Starting from Virtuous Raymond, a top expert of the half-step invincible realm, the high-level members of the Ice and Snow Corps were smashed by the sword energy one after another. Flaming Fire kept moving forward. Her cold and elegant face was suffused with undisguised viciousness, and she said word by word, "All of you scram." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 584. The sudden outbreak of the war was beyond everyone's imagination, both in terms of intensity and progress. The exact distance from Reki City to Mormons was 986 kilometers. Along the way, they would pass through 5 countries, Oga, Ross, Im, Longji, and Eisen Federation, and then enter Snow Country. In Li Tianlan's and Wulan State's original plan, the first war they encountered should be in Im. They would encounter the reinforcements of Longji and Eisen Federation, led by the Snow Country Army, who were attacking the base of the Arctic Ocean Command. The real tragic war should be after they went deep into Eisen Federation, which was very close to Snow Country. It was an area under the strong influence of Snow Country and also covered by the polar night. Right now, Li Tianlan could mobilize about 400 people around him. This kind of number was insignificant for any medium-sized war, but a small number of people also greatly sped up the marching speed. 400 people and nearly 50 vehicles rushed out of Reki City. Under the curtain of night, the long motorcade moved forward in a straight line, mighty and mighty. The marching time was planned to be 8 to 12 hours. During this time, they would cross countless battlefields and officially rush into Mormons. Although 400 people were small, they were all elites and could even be said to be super warriors. The Qin clan might be a little weak in the whole world and not a super dark force. However, as one of the 4 most deep-rooted families in Eastern Europe, the Qin clan might not be able to come up with tens of thousands of the most elite troops like Jianghu State. But in terms of the scale of hundreds of people, the more than 300 elites of the Qin clan given by Qin Dongchao were no less inferior to the elites of the Snowdance Corps in terms of quality and fighting desire. In addition, the most mysterious terracotta army of Jianghu State had 4 groups, and 3 of them were around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, Lin Yuxian, Li Wangsheng, Dongqing Rushi, they had high-end combat effectiveness, super-transformed soldiers who were not afraid of life and death, and elites with peak spirit and morale gathered together. Although the number was small, it represented absolute combat effectiveness. This also meant that they could still play a great role after the rapid march to Mormons. But the march was not smooth from the beginning. The first expected war was greatly advanced. As soon as the mighty motorcade left Wulan State, it encountered the first attack of the Snow Country Army near the border of Oga State. The war was as fierce as fire. Eastern Europe was in motion, and the borders of Oga and Russia were already on fire. Among the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, Wulan State was the core. To the east, Oga State and Ross State were the natural gateways to Wulan State. To the west, the other 2 countries could resist Western Europe. Now, the strongest forces in Eastern Europe were gathering in Wulan State. Snow Country was determined to get Wulan State. The airborne corps of Snow Country, which was constantly advancing in the territory of Oga State, launched an attack as soon as they saw the convoy. Nearly 8,000 people rushed over like a tide. 0:06 a.m. The Snow Empire's 5th Elite Airborne Division was scattered within the borders of Oga State, with countless casualties. The Brigadier General of the 5th Airborne Division was blasted into pieces by Yi's arrow. The battle lasted less than an hour. But according to the plan, they should have reached Ross by now and were about to approach Im. Li Tianlan, who had not made a move, looked calm. His car was in the middle of the convoy. Looking at the chaotic battlefield, he was silent for a moment before he said in a deep voice, "Let's continue." Lin leisurely drove. Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi sat in the back row. The convoy continued to move forward at full speed. The entire Oga State was serving this convoy to ensure that they could enter Ross State as soon as possible. However, when the convoy was about to leave Oga State, someone blocked its way again. A major general of Oga State and a colonel of Snow Country stood side by side on the side of the road. There were only 2 of them. No war broke out. After the convoy paused for a while, an elite of the Qin clan in the front car quickly ran over and knocked on Li Tianlan's window. "Your Highness, this is what the people who blocked the way gave you. We have checked it. It's safe." The elite of the Qin clan's voice was calm, and he held a black USB in his hand. Who are they? Li Tianlan took the USB and asked. They claim to be the pawns of the Samsara Palace in Snow Country and come to help you. The warrior of the Qin clan said respectfully. The pawns of the Samsara Palace help me? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. The master of Samsara Palace did not want him to go to Mormons. Qin Weibai did not want him to go to Mormons either. If these two people did not allow him, who else in the entire Samsara Palace could help him? They said that although the master of Samsara Palace did not want you to go to Mormons, the super masters inside Samsara had a different view. They were only responsible for delivering the things. As for how to do it, it was up to you. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Yes. Li Tianlan lowered his head, squeezed the black USB in his hand, and said calmly, which super master of the Samsara Palace is it? Military counselor. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, nodded, and did not speak. Dongqing Rushi had taken out a notebook. Li Tianlan inserted the USB into it. The entire notebook screen went black for a moment, and then a series of extremely complicated codes appeared. The codes ran slowly. The convoy continued to move forward after a short pause. An extremely exquisite website appeared on the screen of Li Tianlan's notebook. The rules and regulations that represented the internal structure of the Samsara Palace all appeared in front of Li Tianlan. He tried to move the mouse, but there was no response. If this is military counselor's code, he should have locked his authority at this time, Dongqing Rushi said softly. After all, she was different from Li Tianlan. During the 3 years of further study in the Deep Sea Academy, when Li Tianlan honed his martial arts in the ice and snow, Dongqing Rushi had accumulated her credits little by little and became one of the few people with the highest individual credits in the Deep Sea Academy. Her grades in all subjects were extremely excellent, and her hacking skills were also among the best. Can it be solved? Li Tianlan frowned. It's very difficult. Dongqing Rushi shook her head. The core of this level of code is always changing. Even if it can be solved, it will take a very professional team, and it will take a long time. Li Tianlan pointed expressionlessly at the screen that seemed to have crashed. Then what does this mean? The screen moved with the shake of his finger. The screen switched. In a flash, it seemed that the whole world of Eastern Europe began to become transparent. The screen in front of Li Tianlan began to scroll quickly. Countless code names appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Flying bird, wild fox, snow rabbit, night snow, winter wind. Li Tianlan didn't know who was behind these code names, but behind each code name was the latest news from all corners of Eastern Europe. What appeared in front of Li Tianlan was a real-time chat box. All the chess pieces of the Samsara Palace in Eastern Europe were in action. Countless chess pieces in the dark were exchanging information, discussing, implementing, and taking action. The whole chat box kept scrolling, and the whole web page was full of news, discussions, and suggestions from professionals. There were no jokes or speculations. Behind each message, there was a lot of information to prove its accuracy. An indescribable urgency and depression almost penetrated through the screen, which was so urgent that people could not breathe. This is what military counselor wants to give you. Dongqing Rushi looked at the notebook seriously. There are countless pieces of information about all of Eastern Europe, the situation of various battlefields, and relatively safe roads. These are what we need most at present. Li Tianlan looked at the screen in front of him quietly. His finger suddenly moved and froze a message. At 4 o'clock, Marshal Yi Deli of Snow Country and Jonah teamed up to break through the military base of the Arctic Ocean Command in Im. The commander of the Arctic Ocean Command was seriously injured. The Divine Sword Corps and the Polar Legion of Snow Country have controlled Im and are about to march into Ross State. His brain was a little confused. Li Tianlan shook his head suddenly. The Arctic Ocean Command's base in Im was the traditional headquarters of the Arctic Ocean Command. Although there were not many people there, they were all elites and had sufficient armaments. Even if the two marshals of Snow Country were famous generals, it was impossible for them to occupy Im in such a short time. What on earth happened? At this moment, in addition to the Arctic Ocean Command, there were also 5,000 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps from the Beihai Corps in Im. There was also Fireman. What were they doing? The Polar Legion and the Divine Sword Corps. They were controlled by Jonah and Yi Deli, 2 of the 8 marshals of Snow Country, respectively. Needless to say, the level of elites of the 2 legions. Once they occupied Im, the reinforcements from the rear could be said to be endless. With such a sharp force, Ra State could not stop it, Oga State could not stop it, and Wulan State could not stop it either. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe would probably be completely submerged by the army of Snow Country in the shortest time. The messages on the chat box were still rolling. It was already 1:15 in the morning. At 0:53, according to the preliminary statistics of the headquarters, Snow Country has invested more than 300,000 troops in the war in Eastern Europe. It was just a preliminary statistics, and it was the first statistics. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and slowly opened them again. There was a roar in the air. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. It swept past slowly. Under the starlight, the stealth fighter painted with the latest stealth paint whistled past. On the fuselage, which faintly reflected the reconnaissance signal, the badges of the sky and the sea were extremely conspicuous. Wang Xingxiao held the sword box in his hand, his face serious and solemn. Liaodong, Zhongzhou State. The Black Dragon Camp. There was a hubbub of voices, and the killing intent soared to the sky. The fighter flying past at low altitude went straight forward. In the very center of the Black Dragon Army camp, a thin figure with monstrous killing intent jumped directly from the fighter at the moment when it passed by. He landed on the flat ground in the very center of the camp. He was dressed in a marshal's uniform, and there was only killing intent in his calm and awe-inspiring eyes. In an instant, all the soldiers of the Black Dragon Army knelt on one knee at the same time. It was not a salute. Instead, it was on one knee. The roar that shook the sky almost resounded through the whole world with the wind. The Black Dragon Army pays respect to the marshal. The roar was like a tsunami. In the roar that was as vast as the sea, Dongqing Wudi, dressed in a marshal's uniform, pulled out his long sword and pointed to the territory of Snow Country ahead. There was no oath speech. It was simple and justified. In the past 20 years in Zhongzhou State, wherever Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre, pointed his long sword, the Border Control Corps followed, without exception. Black Dragon Army. Dongqing Wudi's voice rolled across the sky, and his killing intent was extremely heavy. Advance. Li Tianlan's eyes slowly opened. His eyes were extremely calm, but there was an extremely demonic blood color burning in the depths of his eyes. Yuxian, overtake. He suddenly said. Lin Yuxian raised his eyebrows. Forward. Li Tianlan's voice was calm. Lin Yuxian laughed. In the galloping motorcade, he honked the horn. The black vehicle roared forward, and the engine roared. The black off-road vehicle overtook the vehicles in front of it one after another, and finally came to the front of the entire motorcade. Lin Yuxian's whole body trembled slightly, and his eyes were already red. Li Tianlan reached out and patted him on the shoulder. This is the most suitable position for us. He whispered, drive faster. The fiercely roaring engine suddenly burst into a harsh sound. Forward. The entire motorcade began to accelerate and accelerate. They left Oga State, entered Ra State, and crossed Im. At 2:50 in the morning on August 24th. The mighty motorcade rushed directly into Im. At 2:56. General Misa of Snow Country was beheaded by Lin Yuxian with a sword. 58. General of the Ninth Heaven E once again pulled the string of rainstorm. At 3:00 sharp. Marshal Jonah, one of the 8 marshals of Snow Country, was smashed into flesh and blood all over the sky in Li Tianlan's sword intent. The sword light of the Li family once again lit up on the vast battlefield in Eastern Europe after many years. It was upright. At 3:15, Marshal Li Tianlan of Jianghu State killed Merix, a famous general of Snow Country. 25. Yi Deli, one of the 8 marshals, died. 43. The Divine Sword Corps collapsed. 45. Louis, the deputy commander of the Divine Sword Corps, died under Li Tianlan's sword. 52. The sharpness from Jianghu State cut into the Polar Ground Army. At 4:00 sharp, Li Tianlan killed 6 generals of the Polar Ground Army in a row. At 4:10, the Polar Ground Alliance collapsed. 15. The motorcade without any repair continued to move forward. 36. The first batch of reinforcements of Snow Country entered Im. Li Tianlan's car was still at the forefront. The engine was roaring. Their blood was boiling. This time, in front of everyone, facing a large number of enemies, Li Tianlan stood on the roof of the car. The cold wind was whistling. The starlight fell on him. It was extremely faint, but it was so dazzling. The sword intent was rising. Countless starlights suddenly turned into sword light all over the sky. Forward. All the way forward. After more than 20 years. After the Li family's highnesses broke through all of Eastern Europe. On the battlefield in Eastern Europe, the sword light of the Li family lit up again, spreading from Reki City to Mormons. It was like a rebirth. It was so dazzling and brilliant. End of this chapter, bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 585. Beihai ushered in the night. Reki City was about to see the dawn. Before the light bloomed, the sky in both places was dark. The electronic signal passed through thousands of rivers and mountains. Across a screen, Summer Solstice was quietly looking at Wang Tianzong in the room. She had a smile on the corner of her mouth, and her calm eyes were almost overflowing with affection and gentleness. Wang Tianzong held the brush motionlessly. He was wearing a black Han costume with gold edges. The robe was wide and had big sleeves. His figure was straight, with an indescribable sense of solemnity under the light. "I've said it before." Summer Solstice said softly, "You look good in ancient clothes." The brush covered with ink fell on the rice paper, but it did not move. The heavy ink spread on the paper. Wang Tianzong stared at the rice paper in front of him, smiled, and whispered, "Yes, you said it more than 20 years ago." Many years ago, when they got married, Wang Tianzong wore the ancient clothes for the first set of wedding photos. At that time, Wang Tianzong, who was still young, was silent and almost dull, while Summer Solstice, who was dressed in golden clothes, was beautiful and peerless. The set of wedding photos that they were most satisfied with was still kept in the album in their bedroom. There were many photos. At that time, Lin Fengting, who had been appointed as the best man of the wedding, was laughing and encouraging the young Song Ci to lift Summer Solstice's skirt. Li Guangtu, another best man, deliberately took the photo crooked. Li Honghe and the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai were discussing the wedding with Summer Solstice's father. It was a grand event. Now in retrospect, the sun was just right on Mount Dibbing that day. Perhaps many beautiful and cruel things started at that time. Summer Solstice's eyes were a little dazed. Time passed quietly for so many years. In the quiet torrent, the quiet and somewhat dull man once again wore the ancient clothes, dignified and solemn, like a real emperor. And herself, "You haven't changed much, but I'm old." Summer Solstice muttered to herself. "How could it be?" Wang Tianzong laughed. "In my eyes, you have never changed." He paused and narrowed his eyes. "It's my body." Xia Ji blinked her eyes and said with a smile, "I'm in good health, as long as you think I haven't changed." Wang Tianzong turned to look at his wife's face. After a long time, he whispered, "She hasn't changed." The Xian paper was already stained with ink. Wang Tianzong's hand holding the pen began to move slowly. His movements were slow, extremely slow, but extremely determined. No matter who planned this chaos in Eastern Europe, at least for me, it's not a bad thing. Over the years, I've always had Mount Dibbing and Beihai in my heart and often neglected you. After this thing is over, I want to show you around. It's a pity to stay in Mount Dibbing for a lifetime in such a big world. Summer Solstice tilted her head and smiled softly. What about the Wang family of Beihai? How's Xianxia? Wang Tianzong asked. Summer Solstice's eyes lit up for a moment, and she still looked a little surprised. If I'm not mistaken, he should be following Li Tianlan's path, but it's not exactly the same. In a sense, he also gave up his current realm and just pursued pure swordsmanship. Summer Solstice said seriously, with a little joy in her eyes. On the day he came out of seclusion, I was sure I saw the 6 paths of reincarnation in his hand. Of course, it was the weakened 6 paths of reincarnation. The sword energy was very weak, but the sword intent was very close to perfection. Wang Tianzong laughed. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. You want to be weak? There was undisguised relief in his laughter. With the most perfect sword intent, he would constantly reduce the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. In swordsmanship, sword intent was the most important. Wang Xianxia would become stronger and stronger, but the 6 paths of reincarnation would become weaker and weaker in his hands. When everything went to the extreme, the most powerful 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai would become Wang Xianxiao's starting point in the constant weakening. Going down from this starting point, it was destined to be a new swordsmanship. I've said that. Wang Tianzong was a little proud. Xianxia will be stronger than me. What a jerk. Summer Solstice rolled her eyes at Wang Tianzong and chuckled. That's good. He has found a new way. I'll leave the Wang family of Beihai to him. I can take you with me. Wang Tianzong said softly, when I go back, we'll set off. It's better to leave the new era to the young. How long will we go? Summer Solstice had some longing. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. Then he chuckled. Who knows? With enough money, we can go as long as we want. Maybe we won't come back. It's just the obsession of ordinary people. I have a clear conscience all my life. Isn't it the same wherever I am? Many seniors in the Lin clan are like this. He laughed and said in a happy voice, maybe many years later, when you and I disappear in a corner of the world, Xianxia and Yutong will find that we left them a little brother or little sister. Summer Solstice blushed slightly and glared at Wang Tianzong. Her eyes were charming and charming. Don't worry. Wang Tianzong said with a smile, at this time tomorrow, everything will be over. I'll go back and take you around the world. Summer Solstice nodded. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, she said meekly, it's up to you. What do you want to say? Wang Tianzong glanced at her. Summer Solstice thought for a while and said hesitantly, Xianxia is following Li Tianlan's path. At present, it seems that the effect is good, but aren't you worried? That's not Li Tianlan's path. Wang Tianzong said softly, Xianxia just started to give up the current realm of martial arts as Li Tianlan did. His future path is to weaken the 6 paths of reincarnation in the process of constantly improving his sword intent and let this sword become the foundation of his martial arts. Xianxia is our son. With his character, if he can't see the end of this road, or if he doesn't have a certain degree of confidence, he won't come out this time. Summer Solstice was silent for a while and asked, where do you think the end of Xianxiao's road is? The nib of the pen moved on the rice paper very steadily. Wang Tianzong looked at the nib of the pen and said calmly, in the future. There are too many possibilities. What height he can reach depends on where he positions himself. The ink slowly extended. This time, His Majesty Wang Tianzong's handwriting was still horizontal. He looked at the rice paper in front of him attentively and said, tell me about Snow Country. The chat in the room continued. Outside the square, Wang Tianzong's sword intent had not dissipated, and the condensed image still stood in front of Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing had been silent for a long time. An extremely vast but extremely simple and crude plan was instilled to Li Huaqing by this sword intent. That was the plan of the Wang family of Beihai to take Eastern Europe. A country, a city, a grass, and a tree were all under the sword of Beihai. Li Huaqing was extremely unaccustomed to this style, so he couldn't comment on such a move. He was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "Are you sure? Do you think this chapter is not over? Please turn the page. Is there any possibility of success?" Wang Tianzong said, "In fact, from the moment Snow Country declared war, my plan had succeeded. But Snow Country is not a fool." Li Huaqing said in a low voice, "You can't control the situation with hundreds of thousands or even millions of troops. Snow Country is indeed not a fool, but they are lunatics." Wang Tianzong said blandly, "And they are a group of lunatics who lack blood. The so-called fighting genes, the so-called strength, the essence of this nation is just greed. In the face of interests, they will go crazy, but in the face of crisis, they will also be afraid, and, I don't deny what you said." Li Huaqing waved his hand. "But can you really bring a crisis to the whole Snow Country by yourself and the Wang family of Beihai?" Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. "Li Tianlan is in Eastern Europe," he said suddenly. Li Huaqing was stunned. Wang Tianzong's voice had a hint of a smile. "I imprisoned the Snowdance Corps." Li Huaqing did not speak. "Li Tianlan has no one to use now." Wang Tianzong finally laughed. It was all true. So Li Huaqing still did not speak. The news should have been sent back. In such a situation, I don't believe that Dongqing Wudi can sit still. Wang Tianzong's voice was a little happy. "I may not be able to bring a crisis to Snow Country, but I and Dongqing Wudi are enough." Li Huaqing's body shook violently. "You want a real war?" His voice was full of absurdity. "A war with Snow Country? We have no choice." Wang Tianzong said indifferently, "In fact, from the beginning, the chaos in Eastern Europe evolved into a war in the end, but you didn't understand it." Li Huaqing sneered. "Did the Wang family of Beihai take advantage of the national power of Jianghu state to take Eastern Europe? Beihai is also a part of Jianghu state." Wang Tianzong said, "No one can deny this." Li Huaqing's face was cloudy. The news that Wang Tianzong blocked the Snowdance Corps had naturally reached Dongqing Wudi's ears. He even sent it back in person. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre. Even in the history of the founding of Jianghu state for hundreds of years, he could be regarded as a rare famous general and a qualified commander. Dongqing Wudi's strength had not reached the invincible realm. But the whole world knew how terrifying the destructive power of the weapons gathered in his hands was. With Liaodong as the starting point, Dongqing Wudi personally attacked Snow Country, and the Black Dragon Corps was almost unstoppable in Snow Country. If all this was combined with Wang Tianzong's plan, if everything went well, this was the real general trend. And Jianghu state would not only take down Wulan state, but even swallow the whole of Eastern Europe in one bite. Li Huaqing, who understood all this in a short time, narrowed his eyes slightly. "Tianzong." His tone became calm. "We should have a good talk." The figure condensed by sword intent fluctuated slightly. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. "What identity do you use to talk to me?" His tone was calm, with a faint smile. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes, and his eyes were cold. "You can talk to me as the president. You can talk about anything." In the silence, Wang Tianzong's figure gradually faded and eventually disappeared. "But if you talk to me as the leader of the academics?" He smiled. "Then there's no need for that." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 586. Li Huaqing didn't know whether it was because of his identity or Wang Tianzong's attitude, but he didn't have a good talk with him in the end. Endless sword chi continued to fall and condense in the sky above the square. The temperature gradually dropped. The entire Snowdance Corps was imprisoned here, and there was no possibility of escape. Li Huaqing stood at the edge of the square, looking at the blurry light at the end of his sight through the blurry sword chi. He was silent for a long time. Wang Tianzong's sword intent had disappeared. The world was silent. After an unknown amount of time, Li Huaqing's body finally moved. He slowly turned around and said to the secretary beside him in a low voice, "Let's go." The black flag stopped beside him. Li Huaqing sat in the back seat of the car, and the car started to move towards the Manlisai Hotel. The flames of war had been burning all over Eastern Europe. The banquet at the Manlisai Hotel was barely carried out under the pressure of Wulan state. No matter what his identity was, it was still the overall situation that Li Huaqing needed to preside over. The light shone on Wang Tianzong's whole body. The video ended. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and did not move. He did not even look in the direction where Li Huaqing had left. He could roughly understand Li Huaqing's thoughts. If everything went well in the chaos in Eastern Europe, the whole of Eastern Europe would fall under the control of the Wang family of Beihai. Because of Dongqing Wudi's restraint on Snow Country, the whole of Jianghu state would also be qualified to negotiate with Beihai. Beihai did belong to Jianghu state. No one would deny that. But there was a difference between what belonged to Beihai and what belonged to Jianghu state. No one could deny this. What Li Huaqing wanted to do was divide the cake. If they really took over Eastern Europe, what could the Wang family of Beihai get and what could Jianghu state get? The benefits in Eastern Europe were too great. The Wang family of Beihai could take them, but it couldn't swallow them all. Therefore, Wang Tianzong didn't mind sharing some or even most of the benefits with Jianghu state. However, sharing it with Jianghu state was not equal to sharing it with the academics or the giant group. Therefore, there were many details on how to divide the cake. If Li Huaqing was standing on the dual identity of the president and the leader of the academics to divide the cake, then there was no need to talk about it. This was Wang Tianzong's attitude, but it would not be his final attitude. Li Huaqing obviously understood this as well. Of the 6 groups in Jianghu state, the academics now seemed to be standing at the highest point of power, but when did the fighting inside Jianghu state ever stop? Even since Li Huaqing came to power, countless storms in Jianghu state had been targeting the academics. With their status, the so-called offending or not offending them was a complete joke. And Wang Tianzong's no talk could even be regarded as a deal to some extent. Li Huaqing would not like his attitude today. And Wang Tianzong did not like the position of the academics in the past. Such a deal, as long as there were enough benefits, was not difficult to do. It was nothing more than a slight change on both sides. Wang Tianzong smiled. In the hundreds of years since the founding of Jianghu state, the Wang family of Beihai had ups and downs, but it had never fallen out of the ranks of the top wealthy families in Jianghu state. The so-called 6 groups in Jianghu state were nothing more than the current ranking. The giant group was loose, the north group was weak, and the special warfare group was similar to but different from the academics. The former had been trying to stabilize its position for many years and purge the Li family's shadow, but its position had been unstable. Although the academics appeared to be full of vitality under the leadership of Li Huaqing, its foundation was poor after all. Wang Tianzong had never looked down on anyone, but for the new upstarts like the Special Warfare Group and the academics, who rose quickly and had a short time and a serious lack of foundation, he somewhat looked down upon them. In the entire Jianghu state, the Prince Group of the Southwest and the Southeast Group of the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be deep-rooted and stable as a rock. Only with such a foundation could they come up with countless chips when trading. As for the cake of Eastern Europe, if Wang Tianzong casually cut a piece out, the whole academics would probably rush to it without even putting on airs. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. On. Wang Tianzong thought quietly and became calmer and calmer. The final battle had not yet begun. He was not sure what would happen in the final battle. But if Li Tianlan could survive this time, Wang Tianzong wanted to see what Li Tianlan's expression would be when he faced the academics who had eaten the cake of the Wang family of Beihai. The nib of the pen moved slowly on the snow-white rice paper. Wang Tianzong's movements were getting slower and slower. From chatting with summer solstice to the present, the nib of the pen had only moved a few centimeters on the rice paper. The black ink drew out the word, 1, on the paper. The black lines seemed to condense the sharpness of the world, with thunder, heavy rain, and raging fire, strong and cold, hidden. Wang Tianzong's eyes were calm and peaceful, and he was unprecedentedly focused. He held the pen tightly. The slender brush seemed to have the weight of heaven and earth at this time. The tip of the pen continued to move, as if it was going to draw a whole world. Wang Tianzong closed his eyes and recalled his life. His talent was really not too outstanding, not as good as Summer Solstice, not as good as Lin Fengting, and not as good as Li Guangtu. But now he walked in front of everyone. Why? Wang Tianzong did not deny that he had today's achievements because of the pressure, because of the suffocating pressure caused by the glory of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years. But he never admitted the real reason. That was fear. He did not dare to face it. He was afraid that the Wang family of Beihai would fall in his hands. He did not dare to face a down-and-out Wang family of Beihai, its vast territory, tens of millions of subjects, and even the grass and trees on Mount Dibing. Over the past few decades, the great fear was like a wild beast, gnawing at his heart all the time. When he was awake, he would dream of it at night. Every minute and every second, the fear and pressure that was like a tide had completely drowned him decades ago. That kind of completely suffocating fear would make people tremble from the soul. It would make people crazy, make people lose their minds, and make people completely collapse. Wang Tianzong was an expert. But no one could imagine him crying in the midst of great fear. What could he look like? Crying was crying. He cried many times and went crazy many times. But after crying and going crazy, he still had to bear all this in the end. With the calmest attitude, he gritted his teeth and led the Wang family of Beihai forward. He was able to survive in such an environment. So he became today's Sword Emperor. With his today's martial arts, he had completely defeated the ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai. He could even catch up with the ancestors and become the strongest patriarch in the history of the Wang family of Beihai. The tip of the pen trembled slightly on the paper. The confidence in facing anyone began to slowly peel off. Wang Tianzong's eyes were still calm. Today, he was still afraid. At this point in the chaos in Eastern Europe, the Wang family of Beihai had no way to retreat. He wanted a war. The war between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country. The Wang family of Beihai would be the core force of this war. Everything was extremely clear. In such a war, the Wang family of Beihai would either win or die. There would be no second way. Between life and death, it was completely the difference between the sea and the sky and the abyss. Really. There would be no second way. Either win or die. He had to win. Wang Tianzong chuckled. He had to win, and so did the Wang family of Beihai. But this time, the extremely severe situation, the extremely huge pressure, and the extremely strong fear never let him take the last step. In other words, he had already taken the final step. It was silent. But he could clearly feel that his state was not perfect enough. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Wang Tianzong was sure that he had now entered that supreme realm, but he still couldn't figure out where he was lacking. He was now the chosen one of this era. But the state of the chosen one was not perfect. There seemed to be a way ahead. He was only half a step away, or even a toe's distance, and he could reach the end. But the heavy fog enveloped it, and he couldn't see through it or figure it out. The black lines continued to extend on the paper. Countless messages began to replay in his mind. Tribulation killed Arsis, and nearly 3,000 saint warriors were annihilated. Li Tianlan was bathed in blood all the way and was rushing to Mormons. The 30,000 vanguards of the Arctic army rushed directly into Mormons and were besieging the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Tyrant appeared at the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance and began to gather the remnants of the Polar Ground Alliance. All the countries in Eastern Europe had expressed their attitudes. When they finished choosing sides, it also meant that the flames of war in all corners of Eastern Europe began to burn completely. There was a great roar. It was a mess. No one could see the future clearly, and no one could figure out the future. The roar of the fighter plane in the distance penetrated the night. An extremely pure sword intent spread across the sky, extremely pure and full of vitality. The brush tip moved faster and faster on the paper. Wang Tianzong's smile became more and more obvious. He didn't wait any longer. He couldn't wait any longer. Facing the fog in front of him, he finally understood a simple truth. He couldn't figure it out. Then he wouldn't look at it. He couldn't figure it out. Then he wouldn't think about it. Wang Tianzong suddenly clenched the brush in his hand. The brush scratched the rice paper, and the elongated words burst out with infinite sharpness in an instant. The rice paper burned and rushed to the night sky outside. Wang Tianzong's figure left the room. The next second, his figure appeared above the square. Then he disappeared. Up. His figure kept rising in the air. He opened his palm and aimed at the distance. The distant night fell. The extremely pure sword intent with vitality suddenly burst out with a roar. The fighter plane landed. As soon as Wang Xianxia, who was holding the sword box, walked out of the cabin, the precious sword box suddenly exploded. The black greatsword flew into the distant night sky with incomparable excitement. The heavy sword began to spin. The sun, moon, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas carved on the sword seemed to come alive in an instant. The blade of the sword passed through the night and burned under the starlight. One in the south and the other in the north, far apart. A man and a sword rushed toward each other with unwavering determination. Rising. Both were rising. Wang Tianzong was still silent. The pitch-black sword energy of 9 states rose into the sky with joy, cheerfulness, and killing intent. In the highest night sky, the man and the sword met at the highest point. The sword intent that tore the sky apart spread between heaven and earth in an instant, and the whole world seemed to be a little brighter. The first glimmer of the morning sun shone in Reki City. Wang Tianzong held the coldness of 9 states in his hand, but his face was still full of tears. He stood high in the sky and looked down. The lights of Reki City had become dim, and it was a vast expanse. The faint starlight shone all over the world. The clear light shone down, illuminating the mountains. Thousands of miles of mountains and rivers were filled with smoke. Wang Tianzong held the coldness of 9 states and looked in the direction of Mormons. A stream of light flashed in the sky. His figure had disappeared. The wind and rain stopped. Under the lonely starlight, the morning sun was getting brighter and brighter. Eastern Europe was getting more and more chaotic. The whole general trend was going to the end with this sword light. It was coming to an end. There must be an end. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 587. No one could tell what had happened at the beginning of the war. The monstrous artillery fire illuminated the whole sky when no one was prepared. The small city closest to the polar region was directly covered by the destructive power. Smoke and fire burned on the ground after the rain, bringing up thick smoke. Blood and wails appeared in every corner. The broken city was trembling and shaking. The dense army rushed over like locusts. Everyone seemed to be stunned. Deity struck with his sword as soon as the war broke out. His sword intent was no longer at its peak because of the trial day. But after taking another step forward from the peak of the invincible realm, his sword energy became more and more powerful. The soaring sword energy almost cleared the army of snow country within 100 meters near the castle in an instant. Blood and corpses were everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. In the castle, the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital took advantage of the short interval to complete the assembly. Then, in less than a minute, the continuous artillery fire almost desperately covered the castle, and the castle was directly flattened in the soaring fire waves. More and more troops poured into Mormons. The troops rushed from every direction of Mormons and converged into torrents, like a great river, surging endlessly. The elite troops that poured into Mormons at the front instantly caused huge casualties to the dark forces gathered in Mormons under the cover of the artillery fire. Several small and medium-sized dark forces, who were instructed by others, followed carefully, or paid a high price to obtain relevant information, knew that the Vatican and the Purgatory of Heaven capital were following Mormons. Before they could figure out what was going on, they had already fallen under the mighty vanguard of soldiers. The flames of war continued to burn. The Arctic army that entered Mormons first was like a fierce tiger. Under the command of Tyrant, a large number of troops that followed the Arctic army were rushing in recklessly. Fighting. Slaughtering. Mormons' calmness and gloom were directly broken at the moment when the artillery fire burned. The real war was exposed in front of everyone. Yes. It was a war. It was different from the conflict in the Dark World. In the Dark World, an invincible realm expert was everything. On the battlefield of war, there were endless artillery fire, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and even more people charging savagely. In the environment of death everywhere, the elite army was everything. In the hundreds of years of history of Snow Kingdom, Mormons had never been as pure as he was today. In this world of ice and snow, everything in this city was either on their side or their enemies. August 24th, morning. When the dawn of Eastern Europe gradually brightened, Mormons, which was still shrouded in the deep polar night, had turned into a sure purgatory. Among the mountains of corpses and seas of blood, Deity raised his head and looked into the distance. For the time being, the Purgatory of Heaven capital could not find out some details of the outbreak of the war, but it was certain that the reason why the war came so suddenly must have something to do with Tribulation's killing of the Vatican and Mormons. In this hellish scene, the real dark shadow Azura, who had caused all of this, was nowhere to be found. The fleet of carriages moved forward. As the first rays of the morning sun rose, the surrounding sky became dimmer and dimmer. The incomparably deep darkness in front of them was slowly enveloping them, as if it wanted to completely suppress the morning light behind them. The vehicles in the convoy had been changed 3 times. However, in the environment where light and darkness intertwined, the figure standing on the roof of the car at the very front did not change. The thick blood had almost solidified on his clothes. The dark marshal's uniform had turned dark red. Li Tianlan's face was a little pale, but his eyes were as bright as cold stars. The morning wind blew in his face, cold and sharp. Li Tianlan, who was straight, turned around and looked behind him. The fleet of carriages was still mighty. But compared with the beginning, its length had been reduced by more than half. Eastern Europe was in turmoil. That night, on the long road from Reki City to Mormons, the Li family's sharpness blossomed unscrupulously. But under the sharpness, there were not only deaths but also sacrifices. Hundreds of elites. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Now there were less than 200 left. In just a few hours, the less than 500 elites had pierced through 6 large legions of Snow Country with more than half of their casualties. 4 of the 8 marshals of Snow Country had died in Li Tianlan's hands. Countless generals, soldiers, and officers had died. Snow Country's plan to take Reki City had been partially destroyed. After this battle, no matter what, as long as Li Tianlan was still alive, he would be known as the most famous marshal in the world. In time, he might even replace Dongqing Wudi. The engine roared on the road. Li Tianlan looked behind. The light gradually brightened behind, and it was getting darker in front. They were close to the area shrouded by the polar night. They were close to Mormons. In other words, at this time, they were close to the real core battlefield. It was the battlefield where countless dark forces intertwined and several large elite legions of Snow Country gathered. Li Tianlan took a deep breath of the breeze, moved his headphones, and said, "Stop and rest for an hour." He paused and laughed. This is the last rest before the war is over. When he said this, he didn't even know if it was the last rest of his life. Countless battle reports were fed back to the palace of Snow Country in the fastest time. In the palace conference room, the meeting of the heads of Eastern European countries continued. In Eastern Europe, the heads of states who stood at the peak of power were nervously discussing one issue after another. The mobilization of the legions, the direction of attack, and even the military discipline after occupying a certain place and the agreement with the local regime. The atmosphere in the conference room was extremely warm. At least for now, although the war was launched in a hurry and they were somewhat unprepared, it was obvious that those who faced the war were even more unprepared. In just one night, they had already reaped huge benefits, even huge profits. In the extremely warm conference room, the face of the president of Snow Country was a little gloomy. Countless documents and teacups had been smashed in front of him, and it was a mess. On the screens in front of him, all the heads of states ignored this, intentionally or unintentionally. A few hours ago, they saw with their own eyes that the president of Snow Country smashed one teacup after another and tore up a large number of documents. They also received similar battle reports. The 8 marshals of Snow Country. 5 of them died in one night. One of them seemed to have died in the hands of Samsara Palace, but the news that came was also vague about what happened. Some said that it was the master of Samsara Palace, and some said that Flaming Fire, the super master of Samsara, was the master of Samsara Palace. It was a mess. As for the other 4, it was clear that they had died in the hands of Li Tianlan. The lone army of less than 500 people set off from Reki City and marched in a straight line, almost penetrating the entire battlefield. There were 4 marshals, many famous generals, and several legions. Their brilliance had shocked all of Eastern Europe. And the greatest loss was borne by the Snow Empire. Most of the other countries had different losses, but compared with the benefits they had gained, they could still laugh at the moment. But Snow Country had mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops, and so far they had gained nothing. Li Tianlan was approaching the battlefield, and the battle in Mormons was also extremely anxious. The coalition forces of other countries, which were closest to Mormons, were still some distance away. When they arrived there, no one knew what the battle would be like. The president of Snow Country's face was gloomy, and his eyes flashed with madness. He had begun to think about the feasibility of fighting this war with the strength of the whole country. Mr. President. The door was suddenly pushed open from the outside, and a military staff officer rushed in with a frightened face, as if he had seen some disaster. Jianghu State. Jianghu State. Jianghu State Border Control Corps Black Dragon Army has stepped into our border. In an instant, the whole conference room became extremely quiet. The heads of states completely shut up. The originally warm conference room suddenly became extremely cold. The border between Wulan State and Oga State was a plain and fertile land. The crops were plentiful, and before the light of day had risen. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The local hard-working farmers had already begun to get up and farm. An Oga State farmer, who was no longer young, walked to his own world with his son, casually discussing what to eat at noon. The youngest son was talking happily, but his voice suddenly stopped. He opened his mouth wide. His tender face was full of wonder and envy. He pointed to the distance and said, that, he stammered incoherently, "There's someone there." Nonsense. His father smiled and shook his head. Can people still fly in the sky? It's true, it's true. The little boy was so anxious that his face turned red. Father, look, he's flying in the sky. His father shook his head and turned his head helplessly. His whole body suddenly stiffened. The 3 of them all looked at the sky with dull faces. In the dim night, a small black dot seemed to appear in the distance. The black dot shuttled high in the sky, reaching the extreme in an instant. He was not flying, but walking. Walking in the air. Black clothes with gold rims and wide sleeves. The huge black sword was carried on his back. His figure walked through the sky, coming from a distance in an instant, and then going away in an instant. The 3 of them blinked their eyes. The figure that had stepped through the sky a second ago had already appeared in the distance and was getting farther and farther away. In that direction, there was a mountain. On the other side of the mountain was the boundless Arctic Ocean. The huge cruise ship traveled steadily on the vast ocean. The morning light was getting clearer and clearer. At the forefront of the deck, a young couple was whispering sweet nothings and waiting for the morning sun. The young woman, who seemed to have just been together, was full of happiness. She opened her hands and let her boyfriend put his arms around her waist from behind. Facing the morning sea breeze, she looked intoxicated. The young man gently sniffed the fragrance of her hair behind her, smiling gently. The deep sea was black before dawn in the early morning. The deep black was constantly fluctuating, with no boundaries, with a heart-palpitating power. The sea was turbulent. The ship was shaking. A gust of wind blew from the far north. The waves suddenly rose. The cruise ship shook a bit and continued moving forward. The young man looked at the sea under his feet, his expression a bit unnatural, smiling. "My dear, maybe today's sunrise is not so beautiful. I think we should go back to the cabin." The woman was a bit hesitant. The man had already pulled her to turn around. The moment she turned around, the woman's figure shook violently. She stood in place, looking away, staring in a certain direction, her face full of disbelief. "There," she pointed to the distance, her voice trembling. "What?" The man was a bit confused. "See for yourself." The woman's voice became sharp. The man turned his head subconsciously. In his sight, the dark surface of the Arctic Ocean was raging, and the wind was raging. In the distance, above the deep sea, someone was stepping on the surface of the sea, moving forward in the storm, calm and gentle. The figure in the distance was getting closer and closer. The black ancient costume inlaid with golden edges was fluttering in the wind. His figure was approaching the cruise ship. The incomparably violent cold wind stopped in an instant. The sea was completely suppressed by a huge and invisible force. Whether it was the mountains, the deep sea, or the plains. Wherever he passed, the world was quiet. As if in awe. The boundless ocean trembled under his feet. He walked on the surface of the sea, neither too fast nor too slow, but his figure disappeared into the distance at an incredible speed. The sky shrouded. Day and night alternated. The morning sun leaped out of the sea, covering the sea with thousands of golden lights. The black figure was still moving forward, his whole body wrapped in the sunlight. The light was boundless. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 588. Liquor, Cold Wind, and Night. The flickering fire was burning on the wet hillside, and the faint light was filled with the fragrance of meat. Jianghu, dressed in black, was sitting in front of the fire, roasting food in the fire, and looking into the distance in a trance. His eyes were calm and happy, with emotion, as if he had seen a beautiful scenery. The roars and explosions that broke through the sky kept ringing between heaven and earth. The exquisite buildings kept falling down. Bullets with blood shuttled through the city, and the sword energy flew in the sky. Countless thunderbolts and raging fires with killing intent appeared. The city, which used to be exquisite and a little lonely, looked strange and particularly gloomy in all kinds of lights. Death was spreading. The thick smell of blood spread with the humidity of the morning. Corpses were everywhere. Under the still dark sky, the whole of Mormons had become a hell full of blood and corpses. He was staring at hell. Hell was also staring at him. Each was ferocious and happy. Death was still spreading. The densely packed corpses carried fresh blood and the aura of decay that spread from the inside of the city to the outside. The situation had long since gone out of control, and it was even more impossible to see clearly. In the extreme chaos, killing was already the clearest and most effective action. The so-called calculations and schemes had completely lost their effect. In the face of life and death, everything else was pale and meaningless. Jianghu, who had been missing since the first day he came to Eastern Europe, looked at the chaos in the city, raised his head, and drank a mouthful of liquor. His alcohol tolerance was average, and the liquor was extremely strong. At this time, his face was ruddy, and he was still slightly drunk. The chaos and killing in the city had been going on, and it became the scenery in his eyes. He smiled with a little drunken face, and hummed a song softly. His position was the only high point outside Mormon's. Because the high point was too far away, it could not be used in the war, so it was not occupied by the army of Snow Country. On this mountain peak, which was less than 600 meters above sea level, Jiang Shangyu was drinking wine, roasting meat, and humming a song leisurely, carefree. A tall, thin, and elegant figure passed through the vast night and appeared in front of the fire. He looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was drunk, and frowned slightly. There was a faint anger in his eyes. Long time no see. Jiang Shangyu, whose face was slightly red, smiled and greeted him. He waved his hand and threw the barbecue in his hand to him. Do you want to eat meat? I bought it in the supermarket in Mormon's. It tasted mediocre. I have wine here, want some? People in East Island drink sake. I'm afraid you can't get used to hard liquor. You went to the city? The man, whose every move seemed to be surrounded by sword energy, took the roasted meat and said in a gloomy tone. 3 days ago. Jiang Shangyu said casually, I bought some food and had a meal in the city. It's cold in Mormon's, so barbecue is very popular. The grilled lamb chops restaurant in the west of the city is pretty good. If it's still around after the war, I'll take you there to try it. You might not be afraid of being poisoned to death, but I am. If you die, how will I explain it to His Majesty? East Island Great Grandmaster Wuxia Xianxia, who broke out of Mormons in a fight, sneered and threw the barbecue to Jiang Shangyu. He said angrily, Do you know who Mormons is these days? And your identity? That's enough. Jiang Shangyu waved his hand casually. Don't assume anything. The fact is clear. I wasn't poisoned to death, and I didn't expose my identity. In that case, there's no need to say anything more. Do you want wine? Wuxia Xianxia narrowed his eyes and said nothing. Every disciple around His Majesty had a high degree of freedom. As the leader of Jifeng sword training school in East Island, Wuxia Xianxia was now one of His Majesty's disciples, but his identity was also quite independent. He didn't have to be polite to Jiang Shangyu, His Majesty's student. But after thinking about it, he still didn't do anything. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him and said helplessly, I know one of the guys in the barbecue restaurant. He should have sneaked into the city these days. His name is Max or something. He should be in the top 20 of the killer list and one of the ace killers of Purgatory Angel. I wanted to talk about cooperation with them, but unfortunately, I didn't find a chance. He took a bite of the barbecue, stood up and took 2 steps. He looked at the direction of Mormons and was silent for a long time. Wuxia Xianxia, who looked a little relaxed, thought that Jiang Shangyu was going to say something. In his sight, Jiang Shangyu, who was silent, shook his head. Purgatory Angel can barely be regarded as a first-class killer organization. I hope they can survive the war. That Max, I really like his lamb chops. Wuxia Xianxia blacked out and said in a cold tone, That's too bad. When I went out of the city, I happened to see Purgatory Angel accidentally colliding with the core team of Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Their leader has been killed by Breaking Dawn on the spot. You probably won't have the luck to eat it in the future. Tut tut, Jiang Shangyu shook his head and said, Killers, in a face-to-face situation, are really ugly and useless. Don't forget, a touch of fear and complexity flashed through Wuxia Xianxia's eyes. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The one who killed Arcis and slaughtered nearly 3,000 saint warriors of the Vatican is also a killer. Not long ago, when the killing intent swept over Mormons, it was so unscrupulous. Not only Wuxia Xianxia, but even deity chose to be silent. The Pope kept avoiding and even fled. Now, no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Tribulation that night could almost be said to be the strongest assassin and killer in the dark world in the past 100 years, or even hundreds of years. Tribulation, Jiang Shangyu sighed. What kind of killer is Tribulation tonight? He is a heavenly son, or at least a fake one. Tut tut. He shook his head and said, "We can't afford to offend him." He took another sip of wine and looked like he was about to fall. "How is Mel lad?" "He's in a coma." Lushing Xianxia frowned and said, "His injury is very serious. Tribulation's sword almost completely destroyed him. He is still in a coma until now. I have temporarily settled him down. The purgatory of heaven capital will not know his whereabouts, but the place I arranged does not have a very good medical environment. If he is not treated as soon as possible, he may even affect his foundation." Jianghu raised his eyebrows slightly. "Mel lad is seriously injured, White Tiger is dead, and the White Tiger group is wiped out." A cold mist gradually appeared in his eyes. "We've really suffered heavy losses today." Lushing Xianxia looked at Jianghu and did not speak. In the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago, Jianghu State, Samsara Palace, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital all had countless reasons to go all out. As for Jifeng Sword Training School, Lushing Xianxia also became His Majesty's follower shortly after the final battle more than 3 years ago. At that time, Lushing Xianxia was trapped in Jianghu State, but Jianghu did a lot of things in the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Training School. He could join His Majesty's team because of Jianghu's crucial role. Therefore, for more than 3 years, Jianghu had been in one-way contact with Lushing Xianxia. Although it was only the second time they met today, they were already very familiar with each other. Lushing Xianxia thought that he could clearly see through this young man who was not too complicated. But at this moment, looking at his back, Lushing Xianxia was a little confused. He could feel the coldness in the other party's tone. But even this coldness was so nonchalant. Thousands of meters away, Mormons was fighting. The general trend had been moving. Victory and defeat could appear at any time. He was drinking, eating, and singing here, and he was also careless. So what did he care about? Lushing Xianxia thought silently, but he didn't ask. He walked to Jianghu, looked at the hell in the distance, and said quietly, "What's His Majesty's order?" "There's nothing special." Jianghu shook his head. "The teacher's meaning is very simple. I'll watch here and shine the light on you. And you, stay here." Lushing Xianxia waited for the next part. The next part was that Jianghu glanced at him and asked, "Do you want a drink?" Lushing Xianxia held his breath directly in his heart. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I stay here?" "Of course." Jianghu said blandly. "What can I do if I stay here?" Lushing Xianxia's voice became more and more annoyed. "Drink and eat. If you like, you can sing. But I don't like your East Island language. You can use Chinese. Do you know the national anthem of Jianghu State? How about one?" Jianghu smiled more casually and calmly. Lushing Xianxia's eyes almost spurted fire. Jianghu State and East Island had not been in harmony since the founding of the country. As Jianghu State became stronger and stronger, East Island naturally became more and more difficult. Hundreds of years ago, the Wang family of Beihai rose and directly took the largest island from East Island. Until today, it was still a shame for East Island. As a Kendo Grandmaster of East Island, why did he sing the damn national anthem of Jianghu State? Ah, forget it. Jianghu ate the meat and seemed to think of something. Oh, I remember. There's a pretty good club in Dongdu. It's called something. I've been there once. The singers there are very interesting. Something called Wenquizi, something. His tone was cheerful, as if he was really chatting. But Lushing Xianxia's face suddenly turned pale for a moment. He turned his head little by little, stared at Jianghu, and asked word by word, "How do you know?" Jianghu's voice stopped abruptly. He looked at Lushing Xianxia and blinked blankly. What? The vigilance in Lushing Xianxia's eyes became clearer. Is this a warning? Jianghu squinted and knocked on the flagon. I don't know what you're talking about. He handed the barbecue in his hand to Lushing Xianxia. Have a taste? An invisible sword intent fluctuated, and the barbecue in Jiang Shangyu's hand was instantly chopped into countless pieces. Jiang Shangyu uttered an "ah" and shook his head. "If your majesty has nothing to say, I'm going back." Luxing Sanxuan glanced at him expressionlessly and slowly turned. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Turn around." Jiang Shangyu held the flagon and looked at the burning fire in front of him. He said indifferently, "If you leave, Wen Kuizi will die." Luxing Sanxuan suddenly turned around. In the darkness, the invisible sword energy suddenly brightened for a moment when it gathered. As the gale passed, the sword light had directly arrived in front of Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu, who seemed to have been prepared, stepped over the fire. He reached out. He punched. The vast but extremely empty power suddenly turned into a vortex in front of him. The sword light and the gale melted in the vortex and disappeared silently. The fire was still trembling. Jiang Shangyu's body shook, and his eyes were drowsy. "No, I drank too much." Don't fight. I'm not in a good state today." Luxing Sanxuan stood where he was. His eyes had become extremely dignified. The momentum of the fight just now was not great, but it was exquisite to the extreme. Luxing Sanxuan's sword in rage was close to the power of the divine list. The Wen Kuizi that Jiang Shangyu mentioned was indeed in a club in Dongdu, but she was not a singer, but the owner of the club. She was an important figure of Jifeng sword training school and also Luxing Sanxuan's favorite woman. Her reverse scale was touched, and the sword with anger disappeared silently in front of Jiang Shangyu. At that moment, the vast and empty power in the punch showed not the absolute destructive power, but the real exquisite to the extreme. Luxing Sanxuan looked at Jiang Shangyu silently. He was silent for a long time, and then he said indifferently, "What do you mean by not letting me go?" "The teacher asked you to stay here." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "This is also to protect you. Now that you go to Mormons, you can't come back." "Protect?" Luxing Sanxuan sneered and said, "I'm the master of Jifeng sword training school. Now my subordinates, the real elites of Jifeng sword training school, are fighting with nearly 1,000 people. As the master, do I need protection? They are victims." Jiang Shangyu's voice was calm and cruel. "I told you at the beginning that if you want to get what you want, you must pay the price. The elites of Jifeng sword training school and Mormons are part of the price." Luxing Sanxuan was stunned. Then he gritted his teeth and said, "Why should I pay this price?" "Because of deity." Jiang Shangyu said, "Only in this way, deity will believe our sincerity. As a follower, you bet nearly half of the strength of Jifeng sword training school with him. He has no reason not to believe you." Luxing Sanxuan suddenly felt a little cold. "Do you mean that His Majesty did not intend to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital from the beginning? It's not a matter of cooperation at all. Until now, don't you understand? In this situation, many people may do it for something, but more people stay here because there is no way back. If there is a choice, the Purgatory of Heaven capital may have left. Cooperation, what cooperation? Zhongzhou state is destined to get Eastern Europe, so what's the benefit of our so-called cooperation?" Jiang Shangyu pointed to Mormons in the distance. "This is the end. It's a mess. Let it continue to be messed up." Luxing Sanxuan's voice was a little low. "Your Majesty, what does he want?" "I think His Majesty has expected everything at present and should control everything. The teacher doesn't want anything." Jiang Shangyu looked at Luxing Sanxuan and said, "To correct you, all this has been expected, but no one can control everything. There is no such saying in the dark world. At least I haven't heard of it. Control everything? Bullshit. The dark world can only sweep everything. Where is the control? Who can really control it? The teacher can predict this, but he never wants to control it. Even the Samsara Palace, the master of Samsara Palace, and Qin Weibai, who planned everything from the beginning, don't want to control anything. From this point of view, our goal is the same. Eastern Europe? We don't want it. Benefits? We don't want it either. What we want is the present, which is chaos. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were a little dazed. She is really a genius woman. She forced the whole dark world to the point of no retreat, and then set off chaos. Then, there is no need for then. Since there is no retreat, the chaos can only continue. As for what happens next, what does it have to do with her? What does it have to do with me? Luxing Xianxia frowned and said with a headache, "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Jiang Shangyu shook his head. "It's very simple. No one can see the current situation clearly, and there is no need to see anything clearly. Because both we and the Samsara Palace have got what we want. The general trend is chaotic, so let it be chaotic." He paused and whispered, "In any case, it will end. The only thing I can do now is to keep you here to protect you, and then wait for the end of the war." He drank up the wine in his hand, closed his eyes in a trance, and lay on the grass. The cold wind in the morning blew over, carrying his sigh, and constantly drifted away. It's a clear sky. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 589. It was the third hour of the war. There was almost no intact place in the whole of Mormons. Flesh and corpses were scattered all over the city. The battle did not stop, but became more and more intense. Perhaps there was more than one choice before the war began. But when the wind and rain stopped and the soldiers of Snow Country swept through all of Eastern Europe, no one could escape unscathed in the chaos. Snow Country was attacking Mormons with all its strength. This was the territory of Snow Country. Under the circumstances of occupying reason, Snow Country's actions were extremely violent and crazy. In the first 3 hours, the first army to enter Mormons was almost completely annihilated, and the most elite Arctic army also suffered heavy losses. However, the huge losses also brought unimaginable damage to the various dark forces lurking in Mormons. This was a real extermination. Killer organizations, mercenary groups, and free unions. The whole dark world was withering. One after another, the forces that could dominate in the dark world were drowned by endless soldiers. A large number of soldiers fell here, and then more and more troops came in. Without any hesitation, under the absolutely tough orders, all the troops were attacking with no regard for their lives. The third hour. When the 3 large integrated legions of Snow Country led the coalition forces of 3 other countries to attack, most of the dark forces gathered in Mormons had almost completely disappeared on the battlefield. From the beginning of the war to the present, Daybreak did not know how many people he had killed, and he could not describe his inner feelings. The dark forces, familiar or hostile, fell under the torrent of soldiers of Snow Country one by one. Bullets, artillery fire, explosions, all kinds of weapons, carpet air strikes. In the shortest time, Snow Country used almost all the means in the conventional war. This was extermination. In the chaotic general trend, Snow Country, and even the whole of Eastern Europe had completely regarded Mormons as a battlefield of extermination. They were exterminating the whole dark world. There were fewer and fewer elites in the purgatory of Heaven capital. In the high-intensity intensive battle, the gap between the so-called masters and elites had been infinitely narrowed. In the crowd tactics, not to mention the fire-flaming realm, even the masters of the invincible realm would be tired. But the soldiers of Snow Country seemed to be endless. Daybreak, who had been with deity all the time, tried to analyze the various situations on the battlefield. Dawn was standing at the forefront of the purgatory of Heaven capital. Blood and flesh were flying everywhere. In the rare rest time, Daybreak summarized the news one after another until he received the most important and sensitive piece of information. It was an old man in the purgatory of Heaven capital who delivered the information. He had been in the purgatory of Heaven capital for nearly 15 years. Including the time in the Lee family, it had been more than 20 years. This was an absolutely trustworthy companion. Therefore, Daybreak didn't suspect anything when he saw the news he sent. He hesitated and then asked uncertainly, "What's wrong with the Jifeng sword training school?" "Total annihilation." The old man from the Lee family gritted his teeth. He was an expert of the thunder-shocking realm and was in charge of an area in the war, which happened to be close to the battle zone of the Jianghu sword training school. 10 minutes ago, he saw with his own eyes that countless soldiers completely extinguished all the power of the Jianghu sword training school and the extremely violent and domineering sword light. It happened almost in an instant, but it could be said to be the most tragic moment since the war started. 2 guest elders, 4 protectors, and hundreds of core elites, the old man's face was ashen. Completely annihilated. Daybreak's heart sank slightly, and he asked subconsciously, "Where is Wuxia Xianxia?" "I don't know." The old man glanced at Daybreak. "It is said that he left the city not long ago." Daybreak's face changed, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In front of him, Deity's figure had stopped. He turned around, looked at Daybreak, and then looked at the old man from the Li family who delivered the information. Wuxia Xianxia left the city. The news has not been completely confirmed. The old man from the Li family said cautiously. Deity laughed. In the chaos, his smile was extremely clear. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. What else can be confirmed? What Wuxia Xianxia brought was nearly half of the power of the Jianghu sword training school. Now this power was completely annihilated, but he didn't appear at all. Even he is not within my perception range now. It can be confirmed. He shook his head. No need to confirm. The old man from the Li family silently retreated. Daybreak wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he couldn't help but say, "Your Highness, the Jianghu sword training school, Wuxia Xianxia betrayed us." Deity's tone was calm. "He betrayed our cooperation." "Oh, cooperation." They never intended to cooperate from the beginning. The so-called His Majesty was willing to use half of the Jianghu sword training school as a bargaining chip. Deity said quietly. His eyes scanned the battlefield in front of him. There was fighting everywhere, and people were dying everywhere. In the extreme chaos, countless people had completely lost their minds. Deity fell silent. At this point in the war, it had long been beyond everyone's control. But such a war was meaningless for the purgatory of heaven capital. He cooperated with His Majesty. What he got was betrayal. He cooperated with the Samsara Palace. What he got was betrayal. Now the purgatory of heaven capital was in Eastern Europe. What else could they get? He clenched his fists gently. Some decisions should have been made a long time ago, but the intelligence of the purgatory of heaven capital was a step slower. Deity didn't know if it was too late to make a decision now, but it was better than wasting time here. Deity took a step forward. A domain condensed by pure sword intent instantly surrounded all the core personnel of the purgatory of heaven capital. The sword light spread wildly with the domain as the center. The soaring blood waves continued to spread out at an almost crazy speed. Countless soldiers of Snow Country were directly torn apart the moment they touched the sword light. The sword light was like a tide, endless. The soldiers of Snow Country fell down one by one. Deity stood at the forefront of the purgatory of heaven capital. His voice was calm, and there was not even much unwillingness in it, only determination. "We," he said quietly, "break out of the encirclement." After a pause, he emphasized, "Go back to East Island." His voice was light and heavy, with indescribable weight. All the people of the purgatory of heaven capital knew that from this moment on, in the face of the uncontrollable chaos, the purgatory of heaven capital had admitted its failure. Because His Highness had completely given up Eastern Europe. They just didn't know if it was too late. The entire purgatory of heaven capital began to shrink the formation as soon as it received the order. The huge formation centered on Deity. The sword intent, which was close to the supreme realm, scattered layer by layer. The purgatory of heaven capital began to move forward and break out of the encirclement. Kill. At the end of the line of sight, separated by countless troops of Snow Country, a roar that shook the whole city suddenly sounded, neat and uniform. The crazy roar roared through the whole city. In an instant, it seemed that heaven and earth were shaking. In the distance, many figures were rushing, charging, and gathering. Forward. There were more and more people, more and more orderly, and the speed of moving forward was getting faster and faster. All the soldiers of Snow Country in front of them, whether they were elite or ordinary, were penetrated, torn, and scattered like paper. Invincible. Invincible. The killing intent that was condensed to the extreme moved forward wildly, and any obstacle in front of them was smashed in the first place. Countless people were roaring. Deity was still calm. But daybreak and dawn's hearts sank slightly. The momentum of the flood ahead was just that ferocious, and from their louder, crazier, and even desperate roars, everyone knew where they came from. In front of them, there were enemies. More powerful enemies were shouting at the top of their lungs. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The roar was exhausted. There was only one sentence. Beihai Corps, charge. 5 minutes. On the long street filled with people fighting, it took the gathered Beihai Corps less than 5 minutes to tear the defense line of Snow Country's army and rush directly to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. There was no hesitation, no retreat. In the face of deity's sword energy that surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, the Beihai Corps directly rushed up. Tens of thousands of people were rushing like wild thunder. The dazzling blue lightning gathered at the front of the Beihai Corps. The thunder-shocking realm experts of the Beihai Corps charged together one after another. The sword light flew over. The lightning went out. The thunder-shocking realm expert at the front turned into a bloody mist. Then the second one. Then the third one. But no one stopped. The whole Beihai Corps rushed over like crazy. Thunder-shocking, fire-flaming, ice-condensing. Groups of people rushed to deity's sword energy without hesitation. The bloody mist was flying. The army was charging. Deity did not retreat. His sword energy domain was surrounded by the corpses of the Beihai Corps. The soldiers of the Beihai Corps were still rushing up. They were still rushing up. Rush, rush, rush. Death and blood were flying cheaply. Deity did not retreat. But on this battlefield, only the Beihai Corps could really move forward. Tens of thousands of soldiers of the Beihai Corps were clearly telling the Purgatory of Heaven capital a fact with their lives. You. Every one of you. No one could leave. Amidst the intense battle, countless attacks seemed to appear from all directions in an instant. In daybreak's sight, someone's body began to burn. The moment the fire ignited, it scorched his skin, but what was exposed under the skin were countless alloy steel plates that were condensed with flesh and blood. The fire burned the monster-like body. The monster roared, crossed the blood, and rushed straight into the phalanx of the Beihai Corps. The flames kept flying. In the cold Mormons, the temperature on the streets began to rise sharply. Countless elites of the Beihai Corps who came into contact with the flames were completely evaporated. More and more attacks came from different directions. Some people rushed out of the ruins, some people began to appear in the darkness, some people took off the military uniforms of Snow Country, and some people got up from the ground. Countless attacks completely covered the Beihai Corps. Deity was still calm. There was no joy on Daybreak and Dawn's faces. They all knew who these people were. This was the Samsara Palace. Before the final battle, the Samsara Palace had quietly lurked in every corner of Mormons. Although the Samsara Palace did not attack the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But on the side of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, someone had already gone directly to meet them. That was not a battle. It was, they left the team. They rushed into the phalanx of the Beihai Corps and finally integrated with the people of the Samsara Palace. It was so perfect. More and more people came out of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Daybreak saw Tianyin from inside. He also saw many brothers with whom he could entrust life and death. On the most critical battlefield, these old people who belonged to the Li family left the camp of the Purgatory of Heaven capital one by one and went to the sequence of the Samsara Palace. They were so resolute. In the incomparably violent sword energy domain, Deity took a step forward with the entire domain. His lips moved slightly. Those sword energy quietly bypassed all the elites of the Li family who left the purgatory of heaven capital. Daybreak, who was closest to him, frowned and took a step forward. This time, he finally heard Deity's voice clearly. It was extremely stubborn. This is my Li family. End of this chapter, bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 590. When the motorcade was about to leave Longji State, the surroundings had become completely quiet. Although the number of people was reduced by more than half, the mighty motorcade still resolutely passed through the border of Longji State. The team, which had been completely bloodshot along the way, had long been unscrupulous. Under Li Tianlan's clear order, no one thought about how to hide. From Reki City to Mormons, it was a straight line. Such a crazy action was for nothing more than two things. One was to be close. The other was to be fast. In order to achieve this goal, the mighty motorcade even directly passed through several border cities of Longji State along the way. The cars covered with blood and single holes passed through the city that had become cold. Until they were about to leave the country, they did not encounter any interceptions. So not only Li Tianlan, but also everyone knew that the core theater of operations in Eastern Europe had begun to shrink, and the troops mobilized by Snow Country seemed to have reached the limit. The entire Snow Country had transferred more powerful forces to places where they were needed more. Dawn had been left behind by them. Before everyone had time to see the sunrise, the motorcade had officially entered the polar night. The long darkness shrouded them. There were lights everywhere in the city. Li Tianlan left the roof of the car and changed into a military uniform in the car. Dongxing Rushi carefully put on the military rank for him and then poured him a cup of coffee from the thermos in the car. His spirit was still tense. But after getting a rest environment, his body began to relax subconsciously. Li Tianlan took a sip of coffee and took a deep breath. Great fatigue came over him. He had stood in the cold wind on the roof of the car for nearly 10 hours. His numb body began to itch in the warm car, and the cold feeling became clearer. He moved his body, drank up the coffee, and said in a low voice, "Something must have happened in Mormons. There is no need to be sure. Things have never stopped in Mormons. But at present, the current situation is indeed a little unusual." Lin Yuxian drove the car and answered casually. Dongxing Rushi took out a cigarette and lit it for Li Tianlan. Her clear voice was a little hoarse. "The situation is not good for Snow Country." Li Tianlan bit the cigarette but hard and felt the taste of tobacco. He shook his head and said, "It's hard to say now, but Snow Country must have sacrificed a lot." In the chaotic battlefield, before the convoy arrived at Longji, it had lost all contact with the rear, which also meant that Li Tianlan and the others were really alone. 2 hours ago, the network center of the Samsara Palace was cut off, and the code given to him by military counselor was completely rewritten. Li Tianlan had now lost all sources of intelligence, but the moment before the network center of the Samsara Palace was cut off, Li Tianlan still got the news from the Samsara Palace. As of 3 hours ago, Snow Country had already invested more than 500,000 soldiers in this battle. The order had almost been transmitted to every corner of the Snow Empire. In the ears of every army, there was only one order. Battle. Only battle. More than 500,000 troops, this was almost half of the army of Snow Country. At present, apart from the few elite troops stationed at the border of Jianghu State that had not appeared, all the other troops of Snow Country were on the move. Li Tianlan couldn't imagine what 500,000 people meant. But if these 500,000 people really intended to fight to the death, the flames of war would be enough to burn the entire continent. Eastern Europe. But now they were about to enter the Eisen Federation. The Eisen Federation was extremely small. From the map, the Eisen Federation, which was only a few thousand square kilometers, was like a small reptile between Longji and Snow Country. The convoy sprinted vertically, and it would take them no more than 2 hours to cross the Eisen Federation. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. Then it was Mengsea, the big city at the northern end of Snow Country. After passing Mengsea, they went all the way north. Mormons was 200 miles away. This was already the most central area. If Snow Country wanted to take down or even destroy all the dark forces in Mormons, they would inevitably set up defenses here and even deploy a large number of troops. But now, this place was cold and cheerless. In fact, it could even be said to be empty. The only explanation for such an unreasonable phenomenon was that Snow Country had been extremely strained and had even transferred all the available troops, including the defensive troops here, to Mormons. 500,000 troops, Li Tianlan muttered to himself. The situation in Eastern Europe today was chaotic and clear. The whole of Eastern Europe was a battlefield, but there were not many cores of the battlefield. Mormons was naturally the core. The other core was the road from Snow Country to Reki City. Although there were battles in other directions, they were not the focus after all, nor were they the focus of the hundreds of thousands of troops of Snow Country. Li Tianlan had defeated 6 legions in a row along the way. Most of the legions of Snow Country had about 20,000 people. The elite legions were slightly smaller, and the reinforced legions were slightly larger. All in all, Li Tianlan met no more than 100,000 troops of Snow Country tonight. Many of them were killed by Li Tianlan in the vast battlefield, and then hundreds of people risked their lives to break through. Now, hundreds of thousands of troops had surrounded Mormons, and they did not even have a way to break through. How tragic would Mormons be? He opened the window, threw away the cigarette butt, and said calmly, "Faster. If I were you, I suggest you take a break from now on. In 4 hours at most, we will officially enter the battlefield." Lin Yuxian laughed. "I can drive." Dongqing Rushi said softly. She looked at Lin Yuxian and asked, "Do you want to rest?" Lin Yuxian shook his head with a relaxed look. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Rushi, wanting to say something but stopping on second thought. "Do you want me to get out of the car? Just put me in any position in front of you." Feeling his gaze, Dongqing Rushi turned her head. Her eyes were clear and soft, and her voice was clear and pleasant. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly. In fact, there was such a dispute before they set off, and it was not even a dispute. Mormons had become a purgatory. It was a real battlefield, or even a desperate situation. As a man, Li Tianlan naturally did not want Dongqing Rushi to take risks. Dongqing Rushi's attitude at that time was the same as now. She had to go. But she could not go with Li Tianlan. The meaning could not be clearer. "You can leave me in any corner without me. I will go to Mormons." Li Tianlan's eyes were a little complicated. He touched Dongqing Rushi's hair, held her in his arms, and whispered, "Take a break." Dongqing Rushi leaned over obediently, rubbed her face against Li Tianlan's chest, and whispered, "Am I very willful?" "No." Li Tianlan patted her head. "Go to sleep. I am your woman, and I have the ability to protect myself. When you are going to risk your life, how can I be willing to stay behind? I am all yours. If you risk your life in the front, I will be more sad in the back." "I know I am willful, but," Dongqing Rushi muttered to herself. Her beautiful big eyes gradually became blank and full of fatigue. "I will protect you." She closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Lin Yuxian sighed softly. He was silent. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. After a while, he suddenly said, "She is right." "What?" Li Tianlan asked casually. "If she is really worried about you, she will feel more uncomfortable if she stays behind. That is the real feeling that every second is like a year. It is better to risk your life with you. At least, no matter life or death, you are together." Lin Yuxian laughed. Li Tianlan was in a daze. After a long time, he carefully hugged Dongqing Rushi's body and whispered, "Yes, at least we are together." Lin Yuxian stopped talking. There were a lot of feelings and emotions that he had known before, but he had never experienced them himself. But tonight, in the endless war, he saw Li Tianlan standing on the roof of the car. At that time, Dongqing Rushi was sitting in the back row. He was driving. During that time, which was neither short nor long, looking at Dongqing Rushi's performance, Lin Yuxian really realized what it was to worry and what it was to be restless. He gently stepped on the accelerator. The motorcade began to speed up. Li Tianlan was not sleepy. He held Dongqing Rushi in his arms and looked out of the window at the darkness that seemed to last forever. Under the starlight, he let go of all his mind. At this moment, there was no war or general trend in his heart. He thought of Dongqing Rushi, Qin Weibai, and even Wang Yuetong. His eyes flashed, which was a kind of cherishing light. Crazy roars and roars penetrated the heavy fog. In the corner of Mormons, the manor facing the glacier and polar region became the only pure land in the whole Mormons. The white mist representing a large area of vitality had been rolling for several hours. A vast mist completely enveloped the entire manor. There were not many people stationed in the manor, less than 1,000. They were all trusted elites of the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace. Because they had been prepared for such a situation, everyone was equipped with specific equipment, especially some kind of extremely expensive goggles, which was enough for them to see something vaguely in the thick and strange white mist. The war was going on in every corner. No one knew how many soldiers of Snow Country had inadvertently rushed into the white mist. Not only Snow Country, but also various dark forces, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and the Beihai Corps rushed into the white mist, and then they were killed by the elites of the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace. The mist spread in the direction of the polar region, and the entire manor seemed to have completely disappeared in Mormons. In the thick white mist, Lin Fengting saw the master of Samsara Palace, who had rushed all the way from Reki City. There were battlefields everywhere outside the manor. The master of Samsara Palace, flaming fire, and Qin Weibai fell from the sky and stood in front of Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting, who looked a little annoyed, had a gloomy look in his eyes. When he saw the master of Samsara Palace, he showed a bitter smile without concealing it. "I have news," he said slowly. "You should already know that Tianlan set off directly from Reki City with less than 500 people and defeated 6 legions of Snow Country along the way. Now he should be about to arrive at the Eisen Federation. My boy is also in there to join in the fun. Most of the people are supported by Qin Dongchao. Did you quarrel again?" the master of Samsara Palace asked. Lin Fengting snorted coldly and did not speak. "It doesn't matter." The master of Samsara Palace moved forward slowly. "I'll rest for a while. There is still some time before they arrive at Mormons. We can stop them then." Her voice was calm, indifferent, and casual. But Qin Weibai, who was behind the master of Samsara Palace, trembled slightly. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 591. Lin Fengting did not follow the master of Samsara Palace into the hall of the villa. He stood in the center of the manor. Subtle sword chi surrounded the inside and outside of the manor, locking onto every enemy that approached. The killing intent in the city filled the air and swept across the entire city. Unlike tribulation's concentration and emptiness, the chaotic murderous intent kept spreading with despair. The sword light danced in the city, and the sound of explosions was continuous. Countless buildings began to collapse. Samsara Palace, Beihai Corps, Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Snow Country. People were dying with every passing second. Lin Fengting stood there quietly. He could sense that the sword chi in the city had already steadily surpassed him. It was the sword chi of a god. The entire Purgatory of Heaven Capital was moving forward with difficulty. It could even be said to be in a stalemate. Lin Fengting was in a daze. His eyes were pure and absent-minded, without the slightest bit of anger, jealousy, or resentment. There was only helplessness and confusion in the depths of his eyes. No one denied that he was a big shot in the dark world. But compared to Wang Tianzong and deity, such a Lin Fengting was too simple. The secluded Lin clan had avoided countless storms. He was at the headquarters of the Lin clan and everywhere in the world. As long as he had a sword in his hand, he could protect the Lin clan. The life of the Lin clan did not have the shadow of a sword, only a carefree life. Lin Fengting rarely thought about anything, which was why he was at a loss. The 4 children who had practiced swordsmanship together since they were young, 4 children who supported each other and were inseparable. They were young and ignorant, yet they dared to stand shoulder to shoulder against the entire world. A young couple who advanced and retreated together, regardless of gains or losses. That beautiful period of time was so quiet, just like a road. As time passed, it slowly came to an end, revealing a cruelty that he still could not understand. That was the youth when they fell out and became enemies. It also represented the era of the Dark World. God was enduring. The Sword Emperor was rising. Summer Solstice, who wanted to be a queen, lost all her edge. And he began to be neutral. Childhood, adolescence, youth, everything was getting further and further away. The grudges between youth and middle age were so long that they were almost forgotten. Their middle age began to quietly come to an end. As they were about to enter old age, everything erupted in the most ferocious way. Mormons. The final battle. It was a place of death. How ironic was that? Summer Solstice, who was determined to be the mother of the world when she was a girl and liked to pull Wang Tianzong's ears, had restrained all her sharpness and ignored the affairs of the world. Wang Tianzong, who had been silent and didn't like martial arts at first but had to pick up the long sword, had become the supreme sword emperor. When he was a child, he had outstanding aptitude and the strongest combat strength. When he played games, he always liked to play the role of God. Finally, he became a god, but he was already deserted by everyone. The teenager who liked to put his arm around Wang Tianzong's shoulder and called him Big Brother, talking about some messy things. How many years had passed in the blink of an eye? The teenager was about to enter old age, but at this moment, he was fighting against the edge of the Wang family of Beihai, step by step stained with blood. What about himself? He had been carefree and neutral all his life. At this moment, standing in this white fog, countless sword energies had locked onto a large number of elites from the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the North Sea Legion. How ridiculous was that? He didn't know if everyone's life was a process of losing themselves. But the 4 of them had lost their sense of self. He has 3 friends. There are 2 brothers. Now, all of them were enemies. Lin Fengting laughed miserably. He stood quietly in a thick white fog. The white fog floated and gently surrounded his body. That feeling was not loneliness. It was loneliness. The master of Samsara Palace finally showed a little fatigue when she walked into the hall and left Lin Fengting's sight. There was nothing wrong with her state. She had already known the message that Lin Fengting had just given her. Obviously, what really made her feel tired was her seemingly understated decision. Qin Weibai silently poured her a glass of water and sat beside her, not knowing what to say. Flaming Fire, who had restrained all her killing intent, seemed to have once again become the super master of Samsara Palace from the woman who could call herself the palace. She took a quick shower and was about to cook when she finally received the news of the internal investigation of Samsara Palace. Flaming Fire glanced at it casually and frowned slightly. She seemed to be a little hesitant. "Master," she called out softly with obvious hesitation. "Who is it?" the master of Samsara Palace asked. Her voice was calm and cold. At the most critical moment of the battle, a hidden code with extremely high authority directly entered the network hub of Samsara Palace and cut into the most critical intelligence exchange and summary system of Samsara Palace in an instant. Countless top-secret messages were exposed to others. A few hours after the incident, Qin Weibai realized that something was wrong. After rewriting that code, she forcibly cut off the connection with the other party. Now, judging from Li Tianlan's marching speed, it was very likely that Li Tianlan had temporarily mastered that code. It was almost an impossible miracle to defeat the 6 legions overnight and forcibly break through the defense line of more than 100,000 people with only 500 people. And miracles themselves were impossible things. The miracles that could happen were all assumed. Among the 6 legions that were defeated in Snow Country, no one knew how many spies that Samsara Palace had hidden for many years played a role in it. After these people were used, they would also enter the observation area of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace did not care about these. What she cared about was that it was too fast. Li Tianlan's marching speed was too fast. She did not want Li Tianlan to appear in Mormons. The hypnosis that had been rooted in Li Tianlan's mind many years ago was an extremely solid preventive means, but Li Tianlan woke up from that state. In the sudden outbreak of the war, the more than 100,000 troops of Snow Country invisibly became the second kind of prevention. The first kind was just a means. The second kind was the general trend. With no one around Li Tianlan for the time being, with only a few hundred people, under normal circumstances, even if Li Tianlan entered the Invincible Realm, or even if Lin Yuxian entered the Invincible Realm, it would be impossible to completely break through the defense line of the 6 legions. The spies of Samsara Palace buried in the 6 legions could also protect Li Tianlan's safety to the greatest extent and delay him on the road. If everything went well, even if Li Tianlan could finally get to Mormons, it would take at least 1 day and 1 night. 1 day and 1 night, everything would be completely over. The general trend could not be broken. But all the spies in the general trend had been changed. The appearance of that code gave Li Tianlan insight into a lot of information about Samsara Palace. So he gathered the elites and directly killed the marshals and core high-level officials of the 6 legions with the craziest power. In the chaos, he contacted the spies of Samsara Palace. The whole dark world knew that Qin Weibai was Li Tianlan's woman. The relationship between the two was extremely strange from the beginning. At the beginning, Qin Weibai, whose status was much higher than Li Tianlan's, did not have any strong side between the two. She was gentle, obedient, and a perfect little woman. But to the outside world, she was still the supreme will of Samsara Palace most of the time. Qin Weibai did not bother to explain anything to the spies of Samsara Palace. At most, she promised to ensure Li Tianlan's safety. Those spies had no reason not to cooperate with Li Tianlan. In the chaos of war, all kinds of chaotic orders were issued from the spies. The whole battlefield was constantly in temporary chaos. In the end, Li Tianlan led hundreds of people through the defense line of more than 100,000 troops. Everything was because of that code. Without that code, Li Tianlan could not have entered the central system prepared for him by Samsara Palace in advance. Without the intelligence of Samsara Palace and the cooperation of the spies, he could only keep dragging the 6 legions of Snow Country on the way. Samsara Palace Master did not have to make any decision now. That code destroyed everything. And the person with such authority must be a high-level official of Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace Master wanted to know who the traitor was. Flaming Fire hesitated, bit her lip, and whispered, "It's military counselor." Samsara Palace Master suddenly fell silent. Human nature was capricious, but some people never changed. There were 12 super masters in Samsara Palace. Even if all 12 super masters betrayed her, even if Saint betrayed her, and even if Qin Weibai betrayed her, Samsara Palace Master would find it understandable and even not surprised. But there were 2 people who would not. One was Flaming Fire. The second was Military Counselor. They could not betray her, and they would not betray her. But why Military Counselor? Samsara Palace Master clenched her fists subconsciously. After a long time, she said blandly, "Contact him." Qin Weibai did not hesitate and took the notebook. But at present, when almost all communication was invalid, she rewrote a code and established a short contact with Military Counselor. 3 minutes. Qin Weibai said. On the other side of the video was a very exquisite room, but the sound insulation seemed to be ordinary. Chaotic voices came faintly, and there seemed to be some impassioned speech. Military Counselor appeared in front of Samsara Palace Master with his real face. He looked at Samsara Palace Master with calm eyes. "Why?" Samsara Palace Master looked at him and asked. Military Counselor knew what Samsara Palace Master was asking. He was silent for a while and said quietly, "At this time, he should appear in front of you." "What's the use of him coming at this time?" Samsara Palace Master's tone became stern. It's good to have a look. Military Counselor said quietly, his voice persistent and paranoid. Why? The Master of Samsara Palace repeated the question she had asked at the beginning. Because I'm a man. Military Counselor laughed and was very frank. Li Tianlan is also a man. A man knows a man's mind best. He is a man. At this time, even if he has to crawl, he will crawl to you. Otherwise, it will be too cruel to you and to him. We can bear it. Samsara Palace Master's voice sounded like she was venting. At this time, Military Counselor was no longer her subordinate, but more like a friend. They had always been friends. To be exact, you can bear it, but he can't. Military Counselor sighed and said, after this battle, you must know whether to stay or leave. But I don't want the person I will assist in the future to become a walking dead. Do you know? Samsara Palace Master's voice was low. Military Counselor interrupted her directly. You may have your decision, or it may be crueler. But you just said that you can bear it. I have done a lot for you these years. Now I have the right to be selfish for once. At this time, he must appear by your side. Otherwise, he can't bear it, and neither can I. A Military Counselor glanced at Samsara Palace Master, waved his hand, and hung up the phone. It was straightforward. Facing the black screen of the notebook, Samsara Palace Master didn't speak for a long time. Qin Weibai hesitated and said, take a break? Tianlan is coming. Samsara Palace Master said softly. Qin Weibai looked at Samsara Palace Master quietly. She hesitated for a long time and then tentatively said, do you want to change your clothes? Is this your compensation? Samsara Palace Master looked at Qin Weibai with some sarcasm. Qin Weibai looked at her quietly. She didn't even dare to show a trace of sympathy and pity in her eyes. Samsara Palace Master withdrew her gaze, stood up, and said coldly, take back your hypocrisy. I don't need it. She got up and went upstairs. She glanced out of the window when she passed by. The vast white fog was useless to her. Lin Fengding's figure was still standing there. The sword intent around him was getting fainter and fainter. There were more and more people around the manor. In a trance, there seemed to be a sigh. The vast white fog was moving. Lin Fengding's figure was moving. Countless sword energy flew and condensed in the manor. The sword energy turned into one figure after another. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.